I want to introduce Lindsay Baker, CEO of the International Living Future Institute. If you don't know about this organization, you're going to find out. Lindsay is a movement leader, speaker, author, and podcast host working nationally and internationally to transform the building industry for a regenerative future. As CEO of the International Living Future Institute, Lindsay advocates for a world where everyone lives in buildings that are safe, healthy, decarbonized, and affordable. Prior to joining the Institute, she served as the global head of sustainability and impact at WeWork, co-founded a successful smart buildings startup Confab, worked with Google's real estate sustainability team, was a building science researcher at UC Berkeley Center for the Built Environment, and developed early LEED standards at the U.S. Green Building Council. So Lindsay is a published author, a frequent speaker on subjects including climate action, regenerative building movement, and social impact in the building industry. And we're really, really thrilled that she's going to talk about how we can have a greener and cleaner future. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks, Catherine. So in the spirit of dialogue, I actually wanted to share a couple statistics about plastic in the built environment, maybe just to weave into this final moment for us today. A friend of mine who runs another nonprofit in our community shared a couple things with me that really still sit with me about plastics and buildings. The first one is that the building industry is the second largest consumer of plastics in our economy. The first one is consumer packaging. So we, in our industry, are responsible for 17% of all plastics, and that number is growing considerably every year as we introduce more and more plastics into our built environment. I think everyone in this room probably understands that we build buildings out of plastic, but you would not believe how many people don't understand the increasing number of ways that plastic is being introduced into our building materials compared to the way that we built even 20 years ago. The second statistic, I had to keep my phone on me for this one. So just specifically about carpet, 2 million tons of carpet, this is according to the actual carpet industry resources themselves. 2 million tons of carpet is discarded every year, mostly landfilled, some burned. Carpet is between 60 to 70% plastic, which equals roughly 1.3 million tons of plastic waste annually. This is roughly the same, perhaps a little more, than all plastic bags, plastic straws, and plastic water bottles that the US throws away each year combined. So when we understand our role in this landscape of plastic, it's really important for us to know that all the plastic that we're involved in as an industry is also a big part of this problem that we face. It's not always the thing that's quite as obvious to us, right? But when you think about something like TI refreshes and how much that plastic is just getting thrown into the dumpster, it starts to really add up pretty quickly. So I just thought that might be kind of a not the most optimistic of the statistics, but I'm going to go into more optimism to round us out for today and talk a little bit about the work that we do at Living Future and the work that we hope to inspire around the world, but also the work that you all can get involved in if you'd like to work with us. So actually, I like to start with this picture. This is a building in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. It's called the Candida Building for Innovative Sustainable Design. It's at Georgia Tech. And it is one of a handful of buildings that is in the family of living buildings, which I'm going to talk to you about. How many people have heard of a living building? Okay. All right, great. So I won't go through the basics too much. So we are an institute that's been around for about 15 years. We have 40 staff. We work across the country and internationally a little bit. And we work on this question, what does good look like in the building industry? That was sort of where we started, was with that simple question. And it was really, at that point, kind of coming up in this era of incremental improvement for the building industry. What does it look like to maybe get 10% energy savings, 20% energy savings? That was like the conversation when we first got started. And we didn't want to know the answer to that question so much as we wanted to understand where are we trying to get to. And I've always believed that's a pretty effective way of trying to shape your work, is to ask yourself, what's the end goal? Let's work our way back from there. And there wasn't as much conversation about that then, but I'm happy to say that over the past 15 years or so, we've gotten to this point that we are now really asking that question, what are the end goals? Think about something like the Paris Agreement. It's a little bit of an end goal model where we're trying to hit some goals by a certain period of time, and we have to work our way back. And so for us, it was about starting to define what the built environment specifically would look like when it was, in fact, giving back more positive to the world than what it was taking out. That led to the question that we ask ourselves and the way that we look at the world by getting our inspiration from a flower. The flower gives us we actually use a ton of biological metaphors in our work, which I highly recommend. It helps you to sort of think through how would nature approach this problem. And we created this blueprint for what it means to be a regenerative building. And what I mean when I say regenerative is a building that gives back more to the world than it takes away, from an environmental perspective, from a health perspective, and from a social community perspective as well. So we built the Living Building Challenge off of that premise, and it's now something you all know, so I'll just kind of go through for those that haven't heard of it. It is first and foremost a philosophy, so it's a free document and sort of a training program, an education program for folks in the building industry to get their head around a variety of different aspirational ways of measuring how buildings impact our world. And we split it into the 7 petals. The 7 petals of our flower are place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. And we go through buildings and look at the ways, and we essentially work on trying to quantify and help to produce new processes and things that build up a library of techniques and materials and communities and professionals that know how to build in this way. We now have officially 35 fully living buildings around the world in all the different climate zones of the US, happy to say that. Lots of different building types. I'm going to just share a couple stories about a couple of them that we have now that I'm really excited about. And very different levels of affordability. So like it started off obviously as a lot of things do, some more expensive buildings that were trying to do some pretty wild things. But now, more recently, we've certified our first affordable housing project. We have a great community that we work with that builds essentially ADUs for formerly unhoused folks in the backyards of homes, communities, single-family homes in Seattle and Portland, Oregon. And really everything in between, schools and healthcare facilities and, community centers, all of that. So this exercise in building these 35 buildings, I think, coming from LEED, when I first heard it was 35, I was like, oh, guys, God, what are we doing wrong? Got to get more of them. But what I came to understand and really love is that the point of these 35 buildings is not to say that every building needs to get somehow through this very rigorous process. Just to be clear, for those that don't know, a living building, it treats all of its own water on site, all of its own wastewater, that is. It produces more energy than it needs. It has to make direct financial contributions to social groups in its community, essentially nonprofit groups in its community. It has to offset and make donations to increase the biodiversity of the community that it's built in. So it's a pretty intense thing to do. And it's a big commitment for everyone that takes it on. The reason that we do this is not to say that this kind of building is how every single building in the world is going to get built, especially not tomorrow. It's to remind us what it looks like to get to that end point and to help us envision what it will feel like when we get there. Because we believe that if you can walk through one of these buildings and see and feel just how different it feels, but also how wonderful. These are buildings built without Any chemicals of concern, that's a fundamental requirement, probably one of the hardest still of the Living Building Challenge. But anyone can walk into those buildings and breathe fresh air and know that that building was made out of materials that are safe for their body, at least to the best of our knowledge of current research on chemicals. So that work inspires people. Thousands of people walk through these buildings every day. We bring kids in. There are educational programs built on them. There are policymakers that come through and celebrities and all of that. It's to reframe and to help us all imagine a better world. And that's one of my favorite things about working in the building industry that I hope you all love too. It's that unlike a lot of folks who work on hard issues in our world, climate change and health, we get to actually show them what it feels like. We get to show people at the end of the day. It's just perhaps one of the most exciting things to bring like a fellow climate activist through a building like this, because they don't really get to see and feel that end point as much as we do. And it's an honor, right? And it's a responsibility to help to depict that for people. So that's the work they're doing. I guess I'll just show a couple of recent examples. I picked one here in the Bay that I think is particularly fabulous. Google's new gradient canopy building in Mountain View. You can go and tour the landscape. This project didn't get the full Living Building Challenge. It just achieved the water pedal. And a set of others. So the way it works is you do requirements across all areas, but then you have to kind of, excel in one area, and this was the one that they chose. So the work that they did, we've been working with Google for over a decade now to help them essentially manifest these water goals for this project. And it's a real inspiration, just the way that the landscape integrates water systems, et cetera. The Candida building, the reason this was so cool in Atlanta had a lot to do with hot, humid climates. A lot of people said you can't build a building that doesn't use traditional air conditioning in Atlanta, Georgia, and people wouldn't complain about it. And it is a delightful building, let me tell you. They don't need conventional air conditioning. It just takes a lot of integrated design, a lot of thoughtfulness, but ultimately it's an inspiration to everyone around it, and it's sort of producing all these wonderful little babies around Atlanta of new buildings that are coming up that are built with a lot of the principles of this building. One of my favorite stories of this building, these are folks who are working in a workforce development program that is focused on folks who are formerly incarcerated, and essentially what they're doing is taking a bunch of lumber that came out of old Georgia Tech buildings and other infrastructure on the campus, working with a program called the Life Cycle Building Center in Atlanta. It's essentially a reuse facility. They take in old building materials and sell them to the community. So this is a facet of that nonprofit building materials reuse center where they essentially make new materials with this old wood. And in the meantime, these gentlemen are getting essentially an opportunity to upskill and join a new workforce that is harvesting, what some would call urban harvesting of materials in our built environment to be reused in new projects. So that went into the lobby. I just added this slide, I said I would, to make sure that everyone hears about our Declare program, because it got mentioned a couple of times. So in the process of creating the Living Building Challenge, we created a few programs that would help really make it possible for people to build buildings like this. And Declare is the big one that most folks know. So we have, I think it's a little over, somewhere around 3,000 products now, about 400 manufacturers working with us, many of the biggest ones in the country and abroad as well. We have a bunch in Australia and Europe. These labels are simplified nutrition labels, essentially for building materials, and we do the vetting to make sure that everything that is on this label is in fact what's in the product. That's a pretty important issue in our world now that sort of came up in a couple of conversations today. It's just that data transparency, it needs a little bit of verification, a little QA, QC to make sure that what is in there is really in there. So we've got embodied carbon right now, but that, as I mentioned, is going to get split out into a new environment-focused label. There'll be 3 labels, essentially, and these sister labels to sort of represent the different facets of the work. So, so this program in particular, I think for interior designers is a really wonderful one. There's a lot of hands raised. That's where a lot of folks are coming from in this room. What we're trying to do through the work of imagining that better world is to then build out a bunch of tools to help you do this. So Declare is a great example of that. We have many other programs that are essentially designed to make all of this work a little bit easier, to find your people and to learn the lessons that other people have learned about how this work can be done. So you can find the database of all of the Declare labeled materials. It also integrates with lots of softwares that can help you design buildings and select materials and specify and all of that. So just wanted to make sure you got a visibility on that. And I guess maybe the last thing I'll say about this on the red list is one of the hard things, this has come up a couple times today, is we have a full committee of scientists that essentially meets regularly and every year comes out with a new version of the red list. And unfortunately, we are adding chemicals to that red list every year as new science, really as new petrochemical-based products are invented and new chemicals are invented, and then we have to wait for the science to come out to tell us, oh, yeah, no surprise. Sorry, your mic. So we have to make sure that we have to understand the chemical impact, the health impacts of all those new chemicals, and then add them to the red list. And so we're actually starting to evolve even just the way we understand the red list to make sure that it's not just a whack-a-mole game, frankly, with all of these new chemicals that are coming out in the world. But it's one of the things I think is probably good for you all to know and to think about as you build this into your practice, is that this stuff is dynamic. It's really important to keep up with this question. PFAS chemicals only entered into our red list for real 2 years ago. They were on the watch list for 2 years before that. But the reason for that is because this research moves at such a pace, right? So imagine if you were not thinking about PFAS chemicals today. Well, there's going to be something after PFAS and something after that. And all of these inventions, unfortunately, are still something that we have to keep up with. So to the point someone made earlier today, looking for low embodied carbon materials and better materials from a health perspective, it's, look for bio-based materials, because everything else is that we don't always know. It's one shortcut anyway that I think is worth mentioning. I guess I want to make sure that I wrap up by saying this is our newest living building. It's a normal looking building. It's in a historic district in downtown Portland, Oregon, and it is a building that is built as a spec office building. So it has to have renters and had to work out the whole capital stack of it all. And what I find inspiring about this building is that maybe it doesn't look inspiring. But in fact, this is the way that we could build every building like this. If we changed our policies, if we changed how we educate ourselves about how we build, if we just changed those fundamental notions of why we build and what constraints we need to apply for our work, this is a possibility today. People are living in that building. It works great and it's beautiful. So it's just a little reminder to ourselves, and we want to have more buildings like this in every community so that everyone can really understand that it's possible, it's happening. It just takes a little bit of work and a lot of community. So with that, I think I can wrap up. There's just maybe my last little question, how we go from possible to scalable, something to seed as we go out into our normal lives. But thanks, everyone.
I wanted to thank all our speakers, our fabulous speakers, for being here today. I learned so much from all of you. And I think there was a through line through this, which is we are all stewards of our planet and our health. And you in this room, especially those that survived the whole day, are really the change makers, those that believe in it the most and that can make the most difference. So don't underestimate the power of one, the power of I. being able to contribute to the betterment of our world. So I thank you all for coming. There is more snacks out there or drinks, but I also want to just do a quick little roundup about our sponsors today. Many great community partners, all committed to doing the right thing. Make It Home here in the Bay Area, I don't know if all of you are familiar with them. They will take donated furniture from workrooms, interior designers, stagers. Carolyn, the CEO, told me yesterday that she is looking for upholstery. So if you have bolts of upholstery, you interior designers, at least 2 yards, she will take it. She is starting a training program to train apprentice upholsterers. So that program will be coming online, shortly. But in the meantime, she needs some material to help train them. So thank you to Next Highest Good, Lauren, for being my team captain today, running all the volunteers and everything like that. Lauren is a zero waste organizer. So next time you're doing a clean out or a move out for one of your clients or yourself, to check with Lauren. She'll take care of getting rid of things in a low waste way. And of course, Remove, you heard from Soren earlier, so he's going to have an event coming up later in I guess in October. So be on the lookout for that event as well. Many other great community partners as well. So thank you all for coming today. I really appreciated all the dialogue we had and the great questions, and I hope you were left inspired. I wanted to say, too, that Lindsay took me on a tour of the Sonoma Academy, LEED Platinum building, right, and also part of the Living Future. And it was just what she said. We don't get to experience the results of all these great programs and these great buildings that we're building that are making a difference. It was so inspiring to see the students light up about what they're learning, because it's a high school, but everything is a teaching moment in that building. And I left so fulfilled by that half-day tour. So thank you for that, and that's why she's here today. Anyway, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and like I said, go drink.